Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to a MSP digital event on being an amazing data-driven SDR leader. My name is Pete Kazanji. We'll get into a little bit more of this soon. I'm joined with Brian Brennan from Aspire IQ and Travis Miltzer from Iterable, both in Denver, conveniently enough. We didn't plan that. But we're going to wait for folks to go ahead and trickle in here for the next couple of minutes or so. But before we kind of start with the main content of the event here. But Brian, because I was giving you a hard time about how amazing your home office background game is earlier, and we were talking about books or lack thereof. What's been your kind of like favorite book that you've read recently?
Yeah, so great question. And for those asking, yes, my background is very real. I can prove it. I proved it to Pete and the team
You
before we got
did.
started.
Yep.
But I think for me, one of the best books that I've read recently, it actually leads in to what we're going to be talking about today. It's called Multipliers.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, just a really great book for managers who want to be able to take what they do really well and just
Yeah.
use the title of the book, multiply it to those that they're managing on a day-to-day basis. It's really helped me put a few things in perspective around my personality, how I communicate, and also how I inspire. So that would probably be that'd be my big book that I read
Yep.
recently.
Your big one.
Yeah.
Travis, you got one? A recommendation?
Yeah, I try to alternate between a fiction and a sales book, so I
Nice.
kind of break it up between. So right now, I'm actually reading a Dan Brown book called Deception Point
Mm.
about fake meteorites, and aliens and NASA and all those type of things.
Amazing.
Great book. Great book.
It's like SDR management, aliens, things exploding all over the place, et cetera, et cetera. I think probably one of my favorite books that I've read recently, let's see, it's probably a toss-up on the sales side. So Jeremy Donovan, Aaliyah Homison's Leading Sales Development, that's been a big one that I really enjoy because it has a bunch of really kind of like metrical research in it. It's kind of like the state of the art SDR management. And then Corey Bray and Hillman Sori's Five Secrets of the Sales Coach. That's one that I read recently that I really love because it's written as a novel. To your point, Travis, about like sales versus fiction, it's like, well, how about both? In fact, I actually just emailed all of our Atrium customers this morning because I bought like 100 copies of the book. And I'm just like, hey, if you want one, just fill out this Google form because it's so dope. But yes, I really like those. Okay, cool. Well, since we've waited a couple minutes here for folks to trail in, I think we are good to go. And then Brad is asking here, leading for the books in here. So leading sales development, 5 secrets of the sales coach. Boom. All right, so let's get started here with our content here. Just a little bit first about modern sales. So this is an MSP event. This is a modern sales joint, if you will. So modern sales is the nation's largest sales operations, sales leadership, and enablement peer education community, made up of north of 20,000 amazing sales managers, SDR leaders, sales leaders, sales operations folks who really come together in order to facilitate peer education through events like this, which is great. Offline events coming back soon, ideally, and of course a really fantastic online forum that's really just focused around helping people be better now at what we like to refer to as modern sales, right? So data driven, operationally rigorous, go to market craft, if you will. And so one of the ways that we do that is through fantastic events like this with great thought leaders from the industry. So I'm really excited to have Brian and Travis here today. Today's event is brought to us by Atrium. So Atrium is actually my software company. We make data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, SDR managers, SDR leaders, et cetera, use data to improve team performance. So it's all about just helping managers be better at managing by metric and helping their teams improve and set goals and monitor them and all those sort of things, all that sales math, using it to make your teams better. So we're really excited to be sponsoring today's event with these super fantastic folks that we have here today. So actually, why don't we start at the bottom here, and we'll just kind of do a little bit of intro so we can, Travis, we can start with you and then go to you, Brian. Just give us a little bit of your background, and then tell us a little bit about what your company is and the kind of the sales motion, or in this case, the pipe gen motion for your teams.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm Travis. Happy to be here. I've been selling in e-commerce and marketing for about 8 or 9 years now. Done a little bit of everything. The two most recent sales leadership roles have been one for a Magento agency, and right now I'm managing the SDR team at Iterable. We're a marketing automation platform. Have a super talented team. We're up to about 20 SDRs in the org right now, and I oversee our Denver team, which is the mid-market division. So I guess to give a little context there, we're probably around a 3 to 6 month sales cycle and about a maybe 65, 70K average deal size ARR. So happy to be here and share a little bit more about what we're doing and where we've seen some success.
Awesome. Brian.
Cool.
After you.
Yeah, so my name's Brian. I'm the Director of Sales Development at Aspire IQ. We are an influencer marketing software designed to help brands really drive ROI through their social channels, whether it be organically or through paid methods, whether it be with influencers or content creators all around the globe. This is my real first official sales leadership role at Aspire IQ. Before running the sales development program, I was kind of just managing some closers from the West Coast side of things. I'm originally from New Jersey, so if you see behind me, I'm from New Jersey. But like Travis, I'm here in Denver, which is where our kind of like sales hub sits. So the easiest way to describe who I manage is I am the general manager for the farmhouse of Aspire IQ. So that's the single A ball club, the double A ball club, and the triple A ball club. So I have currently 8 SDRs that I manage directly, 6 on the outbound side, 2 on the inbound side. And then I also manage 3 individual closers in the SMB mid-market space. And a little bit about our sales motion. We're selling primarily to SMB mid-market brands that are e-commerce solely based, with about a 25 to 30K average deal size and on the annual, and about a 45-day average deals time to close on our side. Got it.
Okay, cool. And then for folks who don't know me, I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. I'm also the head of sales here. So I manage the AE team, the SDR team, and the customer success team. We're a little bit smaller than Iterable and Aspire IQ. Have 4 SDRs right now. We're adding 2 or 3 more in short order. Have about 8 AEs. And so, as noted, Atrium makes sales, data-driven sales management software. We primarily are selling into like sales operations, sales development leadership, like account executive leadership, VP of sales, those sort of personas. We have a kind of like a land and expand sales motion. So it's not like a, take a big bite all at once. We can kind of enter an organization pretty fluidly because one of the superpowers our product has is the ability to kind of just like turn it on by connecting it to your CRM, and very quickly, all of a sudden, you have a data-driven management harness of the sort that would take like a sales operations person, many weeks to build. And so we enter organizations kind of like fluidly, like, hey, let's start with this team, and then we expand out over time. So kind of initial average transaction size is usually around like $10,000, although we'll get up to like an average recurring, like annual recurring amount of like 25 or 30K for most of our kind of mid-market organizations. So that's us. So great about, like, we have a bunch of great folks here to share their expertise here today. A little bit of housekeeping here. Please do please do use the Q&A panel. You can ask questions for the esteemed guests that we have today as we're going through the discussion here. We have a set of questions that we're going to go through ourselves, but if something spurs a thought for you, then please do that. And so the agenda today is going to be all about goals, right? All about goals and how to be an amazing data-driven sales leader. We're going to be talking about tracking the right goals, accelerating onboarding and ramp time, and delivering effective SDR coaching that sticks. That should be enough given given the prep that we've done here. So, but please do, as we go, ask questions in the question panel there, and we'll do our best to get to them after the kind of the end of the initial conversation. So with that said, let's start with the setting and monitoring the right goals. I think, Brian, when we were kind of doing our prep conversation, you had some great things to kind of say about that. So like maybe we can start with you around how you like to think about setting the right goals for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to kind of put a little bit of context on it, I think a lot of the times when I talk to new managers, new leaders, new people who are, tasked to run an organization, tasked to lead a group to the promised land, I think everyone's like, well, where do you get started, right?
Yeah.
And how do you really make this stick across the organization? And I think for me, the story that really resonates is that, since I said this was my first real kind of crack at sales leadership and sales management, I really wanted to take that data-driven approach whenever I first got started. Because before, when I was inheriting a lot of the different things, when I made the transition over, we were just looking at vanity metrics, right? How many opportunities are you creating? How long is it taking them to close? And what's the average deal size look like? And those are great things to really track towards. But I really wanted to understand, like, hey, if we're going to make improvements to this and really start to hockey stick the growth for what it is that we're doing, we want to try to find like leading indicators here, right? And so for us, one of the biggest things that we did was really just analyze our entire sales, motion, right? From when someone hits the website or requests a demo or gets hit up by the SDR program to when they retain and when they actually come up to like renewing their contract. And for me, I think one of the biggest things that I wanted to understand is how many actual accounts should my team be going after on a monthly, weekly, daily, quarterly basis. And so you can start doing the math backwards, right? Say, okay, hey, here's our, quota goal for the, for the team. Here's what our close rate is from a sales accepted opportunity. But I think the biggest thing, and, shouts to you guys over at Atrium for helping me with this on starting small, was the best metric that I used was the one that Sean and you guys talked with me about, which was account touched to accepted opportunity as a metric. So we kind of analyzed when we installed Atrium, we actually were able to look back at kind of like our top performers and people who were doing this exceptionally well. And we set a benchmark around 13% as like, this was, if we were to say if on the quarterly basis, if we are, for every account that we touch, 13% of them are turned into accepted pipeline, that feels like the right metric to go after, given what we know about the sales development function as a whole. So that was really the biggest thing for me, was really just starting with just one really small metric that I actually was able to inform the entire strategy for us. Because once I had that metric, I could say, okay, hey, per SDR, here's how many active accounts you should be prospecting in any given time to say like, hey, this is what's going to turn into accepted pipeline for us and help us hit our goals. And then what that translates into is once you have that number, then you're able to say, okay, hey, how many opportunities can a single AE actually support and actually be able to close in a given time frame? And then from there, it was the next step was, okay, how fast is it taking to move people through the actual pipeline? What things can we do better with? What things can we stop doing, or whatever that ends up being? So I think for me, that was the best way to set the goal, was just start at the very, very top after I've done all the analysis of the pipeline and say, hey, how many accounts should we actually be prospecting at any given one time from the SDR side?
Right. Yep, makes sense. And it sounds like I mean, one of the cool things that you have going for you is that you span across both SDR and AE, because what you
Yeah,
were talking about there is SDR behavior that then flows downhill into AE behavior, like, hey, are we overloading the AEs with respect to how many opportunities they have?
right.
And that might be indicated by, some of their pipeline management metrics, like untouched opportunities
Correct.
or what have you.
In between touch is another big one. Yeah, like, are they actually being able to stay on top and really truly work the opportunity full to completion? Those are big
Right.
things we're looking at. Yep.
So Travis, when you think about setting and monitoring goals for the SDR team, because you're purely focused on the SDR team, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I like what Brian was saying there of almost taking it a step below what the metrics the whole org is looking at. So if you're thinking about quote attainment, every rep and leader is already going to be looking at a number of qualified opportunities, ARR of those opportunities. So I think looking at it before that, of if you're looking at just opportunities mostly, what's the meeting creation rate? What is your meeting created to completed conversion rate? Are you having, any issues getting people to the table when they've said yeses? And then I think going one layer below that, of obviously everyone looks at reply rate, but what's the actual month over month progress? You can really kind of set the bar and show that forward progress. And one really cool way to do that is just, what's my overall emails to reply ratio? What's my emails to meeting ratio? And you can really see when you track it month over month and you have your one-on-ones with reps of, beginning route, maybe it's 200 emails before they get their first meeting. And then you can see 190, 170 month over month. And I think really looking at that forward progression is a great way to motivate and just show that your content, your writing, your efficiency is getting better month over month.
Yeah, for sure. I think the funny thing is that, this is not surprising because you guys are both very tenured sales development leaders. You guys have kind of some more sophisticated analysis that is going on here. Brian, in your case, you're talking about the ratio between the total number of accounts that are being interacted with as compared to opportunities that are coming out of that, because like obviously it's like a batting average, right? We don't want to be giving accounts to SDRs that are going to just like torch them and not be successful. And Travis, I think you were talking about a good like a second level coaching metric of cool, what is the quality of your email interaction here, as indicated by like the level of responsiveness that you're getting there, which would be a measure of how good is your messaging or how good is your contact selection or what have you. I'm a little bit more basic than that because we have a smaller SDR team, but that's okay. It takes all types. We actually have a resource I just dropped into the chat room for everybody here, a sales metrics and inspection diagnosis guide that kind of helps it look at the different types of KPIs that you can look at. And we're a little bit more basic on the SDR side. Like obviously we're looking at opportunity creation, and kind of like the immediate upstream of that, of course, is just like activity and activity and also just kind of like volume of activity. So in general, we have because we sell into sales operations who don't love to necessarily be called because they're more kind of project-based folks as opposed to phone-based folks. We have a fairly heavy email-based SDR motion right now, also pretty heavy inbound based motion as well. So just looking at those things like customer facing email volume, unique number of accounts that are being interacted with, unique number of contacts that are being interacted with, because what reps should be doing is multi-threading within some of these accounts. And then probably like a little bit more sophisticated than that is one of the KPIs that we're setting goals on is like net new accounts that people are interacting with, because it's like one thing to have the accounts that are like on your plate and you're kind of like going after them, but if you're not bringing new accounts and new contacts into the into your pipe, into your SDR pipe or onto your plate, then you run the risk, of course, of just like burning the existing things out. And so that actually can, if you're just only looking at KPI, like if you're only looking at activity metrics like email volume or calling volume, what have you, you're actually not going to get a measure of that. And this is something that I was noting Jeremy Donovan, who leads sales strategy over at SalesLoft earlier. One of the SalesLoft is another Atrium customer for their both their SDR team and their AE team. And one of the things that they really focus on, they call them day ones, right? Like essentially it's like the first touch on a contact, because the nice thing about sales engagement software is we know that if people are following their sequences or their cadences or whatever, like if you start someone, you're probably going to do a pretty good job of like finishing them through the cycle. But we got to remember to start people, right? And so we've kind of like cribbed that from them, where we've we KPI our SDRs on touching, I think it's something like 40 net new contacts on a weekly basis, just to make sure that like stuff is kind of flowing into their pipeline on a recurring basis. But other than that, like we're pretty basic as compared to as compared to some of the more sophisticated stuff that you guys you're talking about.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask both of you on, that we kind of touched on in the in our prep session, was now that we're talking about setting and monitoring the right goals, but how has kind of a work from home or a work remote sort of environment modified that, whether it's from an awareness standpoint or making sure that you're on top of these things, or even just from a motivation and morale standpoint? Because some organizations are going to be coming back in the office. You guys can see that I'm here in our office in San Francisco, but a lot of organizations, like, people moved everywhere. So now all of a sudden you may have a hybrid situation. So how are you guys approaching that with data-driven management? Brian,
Yeah,
sorry, I just like tossed it out there.
Oh,
My
yeah,
bad.
no,
I'm a bad moderator. Here you go.
you're good, man. Yeah, I think that was probably my biggest learning as a manager, because when I was going through all that type of analysis that I was talking about before, it all just made sense to me right away.
Right.
I was like, okay, this is black and white. I get it. Let's just start implementing today. But I realized that when you're managing a group of SDRs, especially, they're only looking at like positive or negative, right? Like what's positive,
Yeah.
what's negative, right? So for me, it was less about just showing them everything at the beginning. It was really being able to set the stage of like, hey, this is what this means and what the way I look at it. So that like whenever I publish things to Slack or send weekly emails, like those are really helpful from a data perspective, just to make it automated so everyone's aware from a visibility perspective. But if they don't understand it, they're never going to be able to act on it, right? And like, yes, it's definitely the manager's job to be able to lead them to the water and ultimately get them there. But at the end of the day, like if you're like, Travis, you got 20 people, like you're not meeting with all 20 individually one-on-one every single week, probably, right? So it's hard just to like throw something in front of somebody without them first understanding it. So with the work from home stuff, like for me, it was all about making sure that they understood what was being put in front of them first and foremost. And then from there, when we would spend time in one-on-ones, it was how do we take this and then actually apply it to your week? So it's not just a number, right? Because if I'm throwing out a number of like, hey, you were going after 50 net new accounts this week, right? That sounds great in theory, but if it's not being tracked against opportunity creation or reply rate or call positivity scores, then what does that even mean, right? So it's like, how do I create like a holistic picture for them? And I think that was something that helped get it stick to begin with. But I will tell you that the other thing that was the best thing I've ever done as an SDR manager was taking what is the thing that drives SDR floors, which is celebrating losses collectively, not just the wins.
Sure.
You get hung up on a ton when you're an SDR. Right. So how do we actually take those moments and learn, right? Because if you're on the floor and you get hung up on, you can turn to the person next to you and be like, man, they were really rude and really mean to me. Like this is what you kind of like coach on the fly type of thing, right? I think in this environment, we're so used to sharing wins that like the losses sometimes get overlooked. But as human beings, we learn from failure. And like ultimately with the SDR function, you are going to fail a lot.
How are you guys doing that right now?
We have an actual channel. We have an actual channel in Slack called SDR Fails. And people will, I was really concerned at the beginning that no one would post in it because like they were kind of afraid to like kind of like dox themselves a little bit for a crappy phone call.
Yep.
But what it evolved into is that people are sharing stuff in there every single day, pushbacks on emails they're getting, call recordings of someone who was like completely just not interested in what we were doing. And what's great about it is we'll start to like kind of groupthink it, write in a thread in that exact thing. So it's taking all the awesome things that we're used to in an office and applying it somewhere where we're using it as an opportunity to learn. Right.
Yeah.
And then that kind of has evolved into, we do that on the fly. And then we have a weekly meeting now every single Friday, where we had our first one last time. We originally scheduled it for 30 minutes and ended up taking an hour, where the entire team just kind of was like showing all the things they learned. And as a manager, I was able to take that, put some data behind it. And then right after this, when I go to my team meeting, I have some amazing learnings to share with them that they can apply right there and then, that I think, you know, really helps that kind of like remote environment work almost.
Yeah.
Travis, how have you approached, you know, data-driven management in a kind of a remote first environment last 12 months?
Sure. And first off, Ron, I love the loss channel, because you take for granted that, you know, when you're on the bullpen floor together, you have the morale. You're like, can you believe what this guy just said to me? And you can kind of pick each other up. So without that, taking the proactive approach, I love that.
Yeah,
I know.
But yeah, Pete, to answer your question, I think it's really important to recognize that, you know, work from home, we can't always look at the same metrics and KPIs as we did before, and things are changing a little bit. And as far as I'm concerned, the SDR team is like the most agile, you know, team at an organization. So why not, you know, take advantage of that? We actually name our team, we're the self-coined gazelles, because we're fast and agile.
Obviously.
So yeah, I guess just a couple examples is we saw a ton more success with LinkedIn, you know, during COVID and work from home. So recognizing that maybe email volume looks a little bit down, but if you're seeing a bunch of success in a new channel, support it. And then inversely, we saw calls go down a little bit. And that was, I think, because, you know, cell phones and direct lines and all that went down. But one way that we kind of pivoted, I think was really helpful, is recognizing that even though our call to connect ratio was way down just because we weren't getting people on, our connect to meeting ratio was still really high, if not higher. So looking at those volumes, and again, it's a really positive conversation to have with your reps. If I know this is infuriating, we've all had those spurs where we make 200 dials before we get a decision maker on. But if you can show that 2 out of your last decision makers you connected with was a meaningful conversation that drove a meeting, then that's positive and a good way to kind of look at it.
Yeah. I'm dropping a bunch of like nerdery into the chat panel here, but like I did another webinar on setting and managing with goals, and kind of one component of that is like, how do you like change goals when something changes, like a pandemic or you know, like, or like, you know, a competitor comes in the market or what have you. And that's exactly what Travis is talking about there, is like understanding like, hey, actually something has changed in the market, and so then like what we need to do is modify accordingly. And part of that might be, hey, like, you know, SDRs don't necessarily like to call because it can be intimidating, for instance, and like maybe you don't have that support of the, you know, the Salesforce or whatever. So maybe not surprising if call metrics go down, right? So like we can get ahead of that, unless of course there's actually like an underlying thing, like, no, it turns out all those desk lines that we used to call onto, those are just going to ring and ring and ring right now. Yeah, so I think in terms of kind of like how we've tried to support this, I love the SDR fail chat room, Slack channel there. I think, yeah, one of the things about a distributed work environment and data-driven management is that, one, it like you really kind of come to realize like, holy macaroni, I can't rely on kind of like organic instrumentation anymore. Like, oh, it's loud in here. All right, I hear people talking, right? Or things like that just goes out the window. And so of course, just like having a better consumption cadence, where maybe previously you had, you know, dashboards up on TV screens. Well, like, guess what? people weren't really looking at those previously anyway. They're kind of just wallpaper, but like, guess what? You're not even, the wallpaper is still at the office, right? So just making sure that those things are being, like, we are pretty aggressive broadcasters from an email standpoint of like broadcasting dashboards and kind of like progress on metrics into various email channels. Like we send it to our SDR team. We also use Slack for that as well, making sure that like progress towards goals and various leaderboards and what have you are showing up there, just so people, I mean, even if people aren't necessarily consuming them on like every time they come out, like every fourth time they come out, they look at them, right? And also just like generates a culture like of data-driven management and accountability and what have you. It's like, yeah, you know what, we measure ourselves here and we make sure that, you know, that we're taking care of business. So that's like one thing that we've done, we've really doubled down on there. So our volume of like, you know, metric distribution has definitely gone up there, both with respect to email and also with respect to Slack. I think the other thing too, though, is really that esprit de corps thing that that's like another thing that has like just is missing because you're not on the floor together. And so one of the things, this is something actually that one of our reps, Sean Cardenas, one of our senior account executives over here, kind of came up with this like really clever idea. So Atrium has a functionality called what we call alert feeds, right? So Atrium does anomaly detection on KPIs. And we have these things called alert feeds where you can like tune an alert feed to say, hey, you know what, show me all the positive anomalies for like these core metrics. Like maybe it's new accounts engaged or new contacts engaged or opportunity creations. Like, you know, and so what we have is like a set of core KPIs that are important for the SDR team: op creation, new accounts engaged, like pure activity, things like that. And then we filter them to like the positive ones, right? Sometimes there are warning alerts too, like, hey, this rep's like email response rate is really bad, maybe you should go investigate. But the purpose of this feed is just only positivity, right? And it goes out on Friday morning, and it's like the Stoke train, right? It goes out to the whole team. It goes out, you know, to the SDR Slack channel, and we do the same thing for the AE team as well. And it's just like, oh man, this person's killing it for this reason, and this person's killing it for this reason. And it'll, you know, it just kind of creates a helpful environment of like rah, because you just don't, you know, you have a bunch of people who are sitting at home in like silence, you know, working, and it kind of like fills some of that void. So that's kind of how we've done that. So we have a couple more minutes here before we pivot over to Q&A. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you all about is, it's one thing to like be tracking metrics, and it's one thing to, you know, be distributing this information, what have you. But ultimately, if we're just consuming this information, but we're actually not changing rep behavior, right? We're not like modifying how, you know, how reps are performing or tuning their sales motion. It's kind of not for naught. So when you think about delivering kind of effective coaching that then sticks and you changing that behavior, how, you know, how are you going? So what are some approaches that you're doing there? And actually, Travis, maybe we can start with you here.
Yeah, you know, the first thing that comes to mind maybe isn't quite as on the topic of data driven, but
sure,
I've found it's received super well if you can think of those trainings that you're having with your reps that are both applicable to the current role, and then kind of show how you can build that foundation for the next role. And especially if you're a rapid growing company, I mean, so many of your reps are going to be stoked to see the opportunity of maybe moving to that AE role next. And so, like, if you can think of a cold calling exercise as opposed to just going through the motions and the script and being prepped for objection handling, what if you really coach on, okay, well, how do we ask a good layering question here? Like, what's the intention of the question? Why might they ask that? And really start to layer on those thoughts of what will make them a better both SDR and kind of lay that foundation for AE skills. I think it's such a better way to manage, of kind of teaching the foundation than just being super KPI driven, because you're getting them stoked about the role, the future, and then kind of really adding that feedback and advice that that they'll run with, and really just, you know, self-motivate themselves. So I don't know if that answers the question, Pete, but that's what jumped into mind first.
Well, I mean, definitely, because I think where you're going to there is essentially core motivation, right? So in order to get SDRs to respond, or in AEs as well, to respond to coaching, there's got to be motivation to change the behavior. And I think what you're talking about there is like, an important thing to do there is to make sure that there's like a pretty juicy carrot in front of them. So it totally makes sense there. Like grounding the coaching in the reason why we're doing this is not just to make you more successful from an opportunity creation or a pipeline generation standpoint this month or this quarter, what have you, but also so we can tee you up to be a senior SDR, or be in it, eventually get promoted to AE or SDR manager or what have you. Brian, how do you think about coaching that sticks?
Yeah, so couldn't agree with you more, Travis. I have learned being an SDR, running SDR teams, and doing it again now, nothing gets somebody motivated like what's next for them, especially in the SDR role, right? It's like catnip. Whenever you can build something off of what the next role looks like, they get super stoked about it. And I think that was really important. I think for us, to make like coaching work in a data-driven environment is, yes, you want them to understand the metrics, you want them to know how they're going to apply it. But I also think in this world, for SDRs, it requires like radical ownership over their own development. And I think that's one of the things that I really believe in heavily. I have a mantra that I've kind of passed on to my team, which is the only two things in this world that you can control are your attitude and your effort. If you bring both of those every single day, you're going to be a freaking rock star. And I've seen it time and time again. And so when I talk to how that actually it gets implemented in coaching is, we have the sheets and we have all these different things that are filled out, but it's really important that I just make it super simple for them, right? I have them write down like what their intentions are for the week, what they really want to be focusing on doing. I want them to sprinkle in some data if they want to, because I share it with them, right? From that side, what they're currently at in terms of their goals and all these other things, that's important. But at the end of the day, it's what do you need help with from me, right? And I think from my lens, the way that I've seen that stick is that they don't just come to me with a problem. I want them to come to me with a problem and the solution that they think is going to be the best way to remedy this. Because a lot of the time, I think as managers, you're kind of relied on as like the silver bullet, like, he's going to make it all good. I'm going to go to him my problem and it's all going to be good. And we think about that from a foundational perspective, you're not learning anything. You're learning how to get an easy answer ultimately at the end of the day. So like for me, I want them to come to me with the problem and the solution that they've thought of so that we can workshop it together. And then I can start to use data to back up whether or not that makes the most sense. And the biggest one that I can think of is one of my reps just came to me with this. She's been in the outbound role for 6 months. She's been was in the inbound role for 6 months before. She's just hit her year basically with the company. Right. She was like, I think brute force isn't working anymore. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? She's like, well, I'm doing like 600, 700 activities a week. And the opportunities are coming, but I have noticed a significant decrease in my open and reply rate, again, with the data that we're talking about.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm noticing the exact same thing too. I have a plan for her. Like I know where I think I'm going to lead her next, but I want to see what she's going to come up with. And she's like, okay, I think that I need to limit the amount of activities I'm doing. And I need to be more prescriptive to who it is I'm actually going after. And I want to spend less time on more accounts and more time on fewer accounts. And I want to be so hyper personalized that I want to make this person feel like they are this most special person that they're ever getting reached out to from. And so I'm like, oh, that's exactly where my mind was leading me. I'm like, okay, awesome. Let's do it. So then how do we track that? Well, we look at creation efficiency, right? If we can go week over week and say, okay, hey, how is this trending downwards? Are you having to do less activity per individual opportunity that you're creating? Or is it kind of staying stagnant? And then from there, we can start to tweak the messaging. We can tweak the way she's researching the individual accounts. We can make tactical adjustments to her day-to-day, but just starting with like that behavioral shift and then taking the data to support it was really one of the ways that I've seen it stick the most on that side.
That's fantastic. I mean, this is part and parcel. This is why I have a huge crush on that book I was mentioning earlier, Five Secrets of the Sales Coach, because it's all about like like what is your coaching plan that's in place, and of course because we're all about data driven management here at Atrium. Most of the time, the coaching plan is rooted in some sort of metric, and so like some sort of indicator that there's an improvement area. So like I'll use an example. One of our SDRs is a little bit like kind of newer to the to the tech space, and was struggling a little bit with respect to their volume, or like their email engagement rate, for instance. And you could see it was like dramatic as compared to some of the other SDRs. And so what we so first we saw that there was an issue in this specific metric, email engagement rate. It was an indicator of the level of responsiveness that they were eliciting from their prospects. That could either be a question of like contact or like contact selection, or it could be messaging. And so what we realized, it was actually like a failure of like appropriate personalization, right? It was like not, it was kind of, it was like like inappropriate personalization that wasn't landing, if you will. And so there was just kind of some coaching that went around that. And so what we did was we added a specific goal for that person. That, like, we have our goals for all of our SDRs, like I was mentioning earlier, like new contact engagement, opportunity creation. But for this rep, we actually created a goal around email engagement rate on a weekly basis. And we said, hey, we want to take your email engagement rate from whatever it was. I think it was like 20% or 15%, but the other SDRs were at like 25%. And we're like, we want to get you to 20, right? And we're going to focus on that. And so we're going to come back next week and we're going to look at where you're at for the previous week. And so essentially what we had was we used data in order to identify a shortfall, like a leading indicator to opportunity creation, which is email responsiveness. In this case, this is quality of engagement versus quantity. And he said, oh, here's a shortfall. We're going to go ahead and coach on this. We're going to like change behaviors. I want you to CC me on these emails such that I can identify where you're having shortfalls. And then we're going to use the same metric in order to like track improvements of that, or not. Right? Because if we're not, we're like, oh, okay. Like if and so that's the mechanism by which I ensure that the coaching is sticking, is because we're actually seeing that improvement in that particular KPI. And the example I use is maybe a little bit of like a bougie one, where it's just like it's a quality of execution um, as opposed to like quantity. It could just be things like, hey, you need to do more volume, or you need to multi-thread more, or what have you. Those are usually the more common ones. Like, hey, come on, let's let's kick it up a notch. But that's how I kind of approach those things. Cool. Well, we have about 5 minutes left here, folks. And so what I thought we could do is we could pivot to some of our questions here. Um, so Colin asked a question here. He said, that he's managing a small team of SDRs and he's adding two in the short term. Um, you know, in a smaller team, how do you justify additional headcounts? What are the financial metrics, goals, et cetera, there? So I can kind of, I don't think that this is necessarily just unique to me, so I'll answer this, and then I would love to get you guys' feedback on this as well. But I mean, at the end of the day, like a sales team is just like a revenue factory, right? Like, we know that we have a win rate on our qualified opportunities, that say like 20% or 25% of like ops that come in the front of the door to the account executives are going to turn into wins at a given average selling price. And so we know if we're able to put more opportunities in the front of the factory, then there's going to be more revenue that comes out the back there. And so then the question is like, where can you get that from? Can you get it from Google AdWords? Can you get it from SDRs, et cetera? And so, if it turns out that your SDRs are doing, I don't know, 20 opportunities a month, and each of those let's say there's a 25% win rate on those ops, and so that's going to get you five wins a month, and say you got a 20K ASP there, that SDR is throwing 100K of bookings, into the pipeline on a monthly basis. That's like a pretty good ratio for a $70,000 or a $80,000 a year resource. But of course, you have to track that information, right? Because we have some organizations where outbound isn't as performant as inbound. And so you just have to be aware of these things and make sure that you're doing it on apples to apples basis. Make sure that you have good, clean lead sources there that, so you're paying attention to it such that like the opportunities that you're actually creating are actually, or that you're creating are actually closing. But that's just a good way of kind of approaching that, Colin. Brian, Travis, you have things you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say just, I'll echo everything you said there, Pete. And then one other metric that would be good to track as you scale is what is the SDR to AE ratio that you want to have. And every org is going to be a little bit different, but we found ours is around 2-to-1, and that provides enough opportunity where they can meet with their AEs and really strategize. Here's our top 10 accounts that we really want to focus on the next couple of weeks. So for us, we found, we've done 3-to-1, that's kind of thin, but yeah, sure. I would say that's the one extra piece I would add to Pete, is to look at what the best ratio of SDR to AE is for your org too.
Great call. I just dropped a calculator, an SDR AE support ratio calculator into the chat there for folks to check out as pertinent. Brian, did you have something you want to add to that?
Just one little thing that I thought was really helpful for me in terms of adding headcount was how much time does it take for an SDR new hire to return their salary back to the business? Sure. And I think from that side, that was really helpful in establishing a training program that works, a ramp program that works, and then more importantly, something that can get replicated as they continue to grow in the SDR role that will basically determine they are going to be a successful AE at this time. We can create those leading indicators that way. That's really helpful, because if you can, like you were saying, Pete, you can just work backwards, okay, if they're getting this amount of opportunities, how many turn into accepted pipeline? From accepted pipeline, what's the rate it closes at? What's the average deal size, and what time frame? So how many opportunities do they need to create? How long should that take? And then that can help you really set clear benchmarks around what the first 6-ish months look like for an SDR. I think that's really helpful for finance, so that they can start to track kind of efficacy of the program as it starts to grow and evolve from there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I was just doing some analysis for a customer the other day, because we have a pretty hefty suite of pre-baked SDR KPIs in Atrium, that are not just activity centric ones like emails and calling and ops creation, whatever, but also things like pipeline sourced and booking sourced and so on and so forth. And I think that's a really good point, because if it turns out, let's say that your SDR's OTE is depending on where you're at, it's anywhere between 60 and 80. And let's say, but if they're able to drive, 60K of bookings, and if your deal cycle is 60 days or 90 days or 120 days, if they're able to pay for themselves in the first 6 months of their existence, and then everything else from there is kind of house money, if you will, then that's fantastic. Now, on the converse, it might just turn out that your outbound motion, that an outbound sales motion, in Atrium's case, an outbound prospecting motion works pretty well, because most organizations don't have great data-driven management behaviors in place, but they feel the pain. So if we're able to show up and be like, hey, just turn this on, we're able to get a transaction going pretty easily. Whereas if you're maybe you're a marketing automation platform or what have you, it's probably going to be more of an initiative based sale, where they're like, hey, yeah, we've been thinking about the fact that responses is terrible, Travis, and we'd like to figure out something that's a little bit more modern there. So in those sort of situations, the opportunities that outbound is creating, or at least the first shot on those goals, maybe doesn't turn into revenue for more 9 months or 12 months down the road, because what we're doing is we're putting a hook in them for when they get around to the point where they're just yeah, you know what, we're finally done with exact target or what have you. Wonderful. So I think the last question that we had here before we kind of wrap up here was a question of how do you approach, or what is what do you see as the difference between an opportunity production for inbound versus outbound SDRs? I think, do you both have both varieties under your wing? Travis, have you kind of noticed the a rule of thumb as to the kind of the ratio there between like inbound versus outbound?
No, I'll defer most of this. My team's all outbound. I will say
Okay.
though that it's super important to have a great relationship with marketing, because although we're all outbound, we heavily
Sure.
rely on those resources for marketing, of have engaged with this white paper or have attended a webinar. And being able to follow up on those kind of marketing more warm leads in an outbound effort
Sure.
has been a metric and just dashboards that we really coach the reps on jumping on top of. But yeah, in terms of the ratios, I'll defer to you guys. I don't have as much visibility on that side.
Brian, what's your take on that?
I mean, I think it depends on the motion and what your current inbound demand looks like. Like for us, we are in a very highly competitive market where we are, if you search influencer marketing software on Google, you're going to get like 20 results. And it can be kind of confusing for some individual buyers in that individual situation. So I mean, for us, I'd say it's closer to like 3 to 1, 3 inbound ops for every 1. If I look at like, the past couple months when we really started to like hyper scale in terms of volume, in terms of output, like it feels more like 3 to 1 in our situation on that side. But to reiterate what Travis said, this is something we had historically not done, which is work very closely with marketing from an outbound perspective. And just being able to capture these marketing warm leads, like the biggest one for us, if you guys have demo forms on your website, we have like a lot of times people don't finish those.
Yeah, it's huge.
And like, so what we do is we round robin those to the outbound SDRs. And like right there, we have captured conversion that would have never happened if we didn't have a team doing this, right? It would have just fell to the wayside. So just, and it, like,
is that something, are you able to just capture like partially completed demo forms in your marketing automation system?
Yeah. So we'll get like, maybe the person fills out their name and email address and then doesn't complete the booking. We'll be able to go through, and a lot of times it'll take just as long to potentially convert that person in as it would an outbound, but we're still doing it, right? And I think that is the thing that has really allowed us to like prove like we can keep doing this during the pandemic, right? Like if quantity goes down because less people are picking up the phone or whatever it ends up being, like we can still capture demand from the outbound side in the same way we would before, and I kind of like not lose a beat a little bit. So I would echo that point. If you guys aren't doing that, that is like probably one of the easiest home runs to hit for your team. They're gonna love you. I don't know about you, Travis, but whenever we started doing it for our team, they were like, "Are you kidding me? We've been missing this for like years." I'm like, "Got it now. Let's move forward. Let's go nuts."
Well, sounds like you've been in my office.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool, folks. Well, this was really fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and for all of these, absolutely delightful, gems that you guys have been sharing with us. Wanted to, from a wrap up standpoint, wanted to thank everybody for showing up here, and of course thank Brian and Travis for taking time out of their busy day. I'm sure their SDRs are off like, goofing off on TikTok right now because they're not, exactly, just running rampant right now because the managers aren't, when the cat's away. But thank you very much, folks. And from our standpoint here at Atrium, we're really happy to have, to have the opportunity to sponsor this, because we live and breathe data-driven SDR management, data-driven AE management, et cetera. And so we love this stuff. And so if folks are looking for ways to better manage and improve their teams with data, we'd love to talk with you about that. We, it takes 2 minutes to set up an Atrium instance. So folks, thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll send out this recording after the fact to everybody who registered and attended. So thanks, folks.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.